YouTube, how are you now? So Call of Duty just released a blog detailing how their matchmaking works. So we're just gonna go over that blog, go over what they said, and then share my thoughts on what I think about what they said. So just reading from the blog, it says, with the launch of Modern Warfare 3 Season 1 late last year, we committed to a conversation with our community about matchmaking. Today's intel is intended to kick off that dialogue and is a new beginning for what we hope will be an ongoing conversation about matchmaking, sharing our process and learnings with you to answer questions and concerns we've seen within the community. This blog focuses on how matchmaking works across multiplayer only. We will be continuing the conversation about matchmaking in other modes such as Call of Duty Warzone and ranked play at a later date. For players that have heard the term but aren't familiar with what we're referring to, matchmaking is a multi-factor process to place players on teams with and against each other to compete in online games. The single biggest priority with respect to multiplayer matchmaking is delivering a fun experience to our players. While we have many years of testing and learning as part of our matchmaking process, we are continuously working to deliver the best experiences possible. For that reason, we continue to test and look forward to more enhancements to come. We often see the community refer to our matchmaking system as skill-based matchmaking. Call of Duty does consider skill, or more specifically player performance, as a component, as do most in the industry, but skill is not the dominant variable. We consider and prioritize several factors to create lobbies. Matchmaking overview. Call of Duty multiplayer matchmaking is composed of many factors. 1. Connection. As the community will attest, ping is king. Connection is the most critical and heavily weighted factor in the matchmaking process. So that's definitely probably technically true, but at the same time not the whole reality either, because it may be the first factor they consider, and there's probably a max ping that they're willing to work with, so it won't go beyond that max ping, but it definitely doesn't go for the best connection possible. Because I've had games where it was over 200 millisecond ping, so that's definitely not ping is king. I'm sure I have better servers than that, because I live in the United States on the West Coast, and during prime time, there's servers in California, there's servers in Oregon, there's servers in Texas, so those are like 20, 30, 40 millisecond ping, but I don't get games that low ping very often, so. While technically that may be true that they won't sacrifice ping to a degree, they will go beyond what most players would consider acceptable ping. So their idea of acceptable ping doesn't match what the community's idea of acceptable ping is. But they do probably have a hard cap on what they'll allow for max ping. It's like my max ping would probably be like 50 milliseconds, whereas their max ping is probably 200, 300, 400 milliseconds. So definitely not acceptable ping limit for a fast-paced Twitch first-person shooter. Second variable is time to match. This factor is the second most critical to the matchmaking process. We all want to spend time playing the game rather than waiting for matches to start. Again, another technically true, but not the reality of what happens in game, because I usually wait to find a match anywhere from 90 seconds plus. Usually it takes at least a couple minutes to find a match. I don't necessarily play at peak times all the time, but even during peak times in the United States, like on the weekends, in the middle of the day, or prime time during the weekdays, evenings, it still takes just as long to find matches. So 90 seconds plus finding a game is not an ideal situation, when I'm sure there are plenty more matches available. It's just not going to put me in those matches because it's trying to factor other things as well. So while those two may be the main priorities, it definitely is willing to sacrifice those two to match based on other things as well. 3. The following factors are also critical to the matchmaking process. Playlist diversity, the number of playlists available for players to choose from. recent maps and modes, considering maps you have recently played on as well as your mode preferences, editable in quick play settings. So whatever you select, obviously that affects your matchmaking. So if you only select certain game modes, it's going to take a little while to find those game modes versus just putting you in whatever game modes are available. Recent maps is an interesting thing. I don't know why that would play into it, but I guess they're trying to keep an idea of what maps you like to play on, so tries to put you in those maps versus maps you don't like to play on. Another one is skill performance. This is used to give our players a global community with a wide skill range the opportunity to have an impact in every match. I don't know if I agree with that, because the way the skill matching seems to work is they'll put the worst players in the lobby on the best players team, so it's not able to find perfect skill matches for the games. So you're going to have good players, you're going to have average players, you're going to have bad players. So it'll put all the bad players on the good players team, and the bad players aren't able to do anything because everybody on the other team, even though they're all around average, are better than them. So they can't do anything, and then the good player has to do everything to try to carry the team. So bad players all being on the same team versus if they just split up the best players and split up the worst players and then split up the average players, everybody will be able to do something. But if they put all the bad players on the best players team, all the bad players aren't able to do anything. So definitely not able to have an impact in every match the way it's set up currently. Input device, so controller or mouse and keyboard. So they probably try to match controller with controller and mouse and keyboard with mouse and keyboard if possible. Platform, the device, PC, console that you're playing on. So even with crossplay on, I guess they try to match console with console and PC with PC if it's possible, but definitely see a variety there. But I believe PlayStation is the only one that is able to disable crossplay, so everybody else has to just go with what the game gives them. And then voice chat, enabled or disabled. So I guess it matches players who are using voice chat with players who are using voice chat and players who aren't with aren't, I guess. Interesting. So every time a player begins matchmaking in multiplayer, for example, the process needs to work through all these factors to find other players, all of which are also being analyzed to quickly assemble a lobby that is stable and competitive. These factors have resulted in a process that we believe provides the best player experience and creates a stronger community for Call of Duty worldwide. So yeah, the best player experience for certain players maybe, not all. So the average majority and the below average players, it probably benefits quite a bit. Whereas the above average players is definitely not the best experience possible because it does sacrifice your connection and puts you in games where it's just not winnable for whatever reason based on your performance. So definitely not the best player experience for everybody. For some, sure, not for all though. Let's get more technical on a few of these factors. Measuring connection for matchmaking. Whether you're playing for fun with friends or looking to climb the leaderboards, playing for fun with friends, yeah. That's another problem with the skill-based matchmaking they have there, because if you have a friends group of varying skill, it's not fun to play together. So if you have a good player, some average players, some bad players, the average and below average players aren't going to have fun at all because the skill matches, you got to put them in above average lobbies because of that higher skill player. So the lower skill players aren't going to be able to do anything. They're not going to be able to have any fun. So that's probably one of the biggest problems I have with the current matchmaking system is it doesn't make the game fun for groups of friends of varying skill. So I used to have a large group of friends who played Call of Duty together, and they would want to play with me because I'm a pretty good player. Not the best, but definitely above average. So they all varied from above average to below average as well. So the average and below average players wanted to play with me because playing with me gave them a better chance of winning. Because it was usually against average players. The vast majority of players are around average skill. So the vast majority of the lobbies consisted of a vast majority of average skill players. So putting me in the mix gave them a better chance of winning versus just playing by themselves. So they wanted to play with me, but now they don't want to play with me because my lobbies are too hard. They have a better time by themselves because the matchmaking goes easier on them when they're playing without me versus when they're playing with me. So yeah, whether you're playing for fun with friends or looking to climb the leaderboards, connection is the most important part of the online Call of Duty experience. Connection dictates the speed at which the game can transfer information from every player to and from our servers. Call of Duty's matchmaking process evaluates a metric we call delta ping, which is the difference in round-trip time of the data between your best data center, almost always the one closest to you, and the data center onto which your lobby has been placed, based on all players in a lobby. To reiterate, we always try to maximize the times we place players in data centers that are closest to them. Yeah, I don't think that's true. Maybe for the majority of players, but definitely not my experience. So I don't think I've really had very many games that were below like 60 millisecond ping, so maybe a small minority, but definitely not the majority of them. The majority of them are pretty high ping. So Call of Duty uses a client-server model to host matches where the time it takes to share information between the player, client, and the data center dedicated server has an impact on the overall feel of a match. The Call of Duty netcode, which we've discussed in the past, works to reduce the effect of latency, but cannot completely eliminate it. The matchmaking process seeks to reduce the overall amount of latency by prioritizing stable connections or low ping, with a shortened wait time in mind. Measuring time to match for matchmaking. Any form of matchmaking takes time. If the wait time in a lobby is excessively long, players typically recycle the process by canceling out of matchmaking search and restarting it, or even quitting. This does not quicken the matchmaking process and in fact can even be detrimental. For example, in the popular Modern Warfare 3 Rustment playlist, consisting of Rust and Shipment in rotation, players often leave lobbies and or matches early on, hoping to re-queue into Shipment instead. This creates a vacant spot on a team during an early stage of the match. As the matchmaking process may prioritize backfilling that spot, this could result in players perceiving that Rust is disproportionately selected over Shipment. Too long didn't read, trying to cherry pick maps may have an unexpected result. Our goal is to ensure that players spend more time playing matches rather than waiting for them. Well, if that's a problem, maybe you should give players the choice what map they want to play on. If you're worried about them backing out of maps they don't want to play, you should give players the choice on what maps they do want to play, so that's not an issue. You can't expect players to change their behavior to suit your matchmaking, you know? Measuring skill for matchmaking. While skill is one of several factors in Call of Duty multiplayer matchmaking, we know the community wants more information about how it fits into the process. Skill is determined based on a player's overall performance, kills, deaths, wins, losses, and more, including mode selection in recent matches and as an overall metric across all multiplayer experiences. This is a fluid measurement that's consistently updating and reacting to your gameplay. Skill is not only a factor in matchmaking players against appropriate enemies, but also when finding teammates. So yeah, that doesn't always work out, because if you are on one of the extreme ends of the skill curve, it's going to have difficulty finding similar skill matches. So what it's going to end up doing is finding whoever it can, which would be majority average, but if you skew those results, it's going to try to find below average players to put on your team to even the odds. So it's always trying to go for that 50-50 win rate, 1 KD outcome. So if you're an above average player in an average lobby, it's going to put below average players in that lobby with you on your team to try to even it out, which is a terrible system. Call of Duty has historically considered player performance among other factors as part of our matchmaking process. Our work in this area dates back as early as Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare 2007. Skill is implemented across the video game industry, and we recognize that continuous refinement is required to deliver the best possible experience for our players. So yeah, everybody knows that skill matching has been in Call of Duty from the very beginning, but the way they implement it has changed drastically since the early days. So nobody really had a problem with the older games how skill matching worked, because basically it just had a protected bracket for either new players or far below average players who couldn't really do anything against the average majority, so they had their own protected bracket. That's always been in Call of Duty. But the rest of the players, average and above average, were able to play against each other. So while technically that's true, the way they've implemented has changed drastically since the early days compared to like Modern Warfare 2019 and beyond. Modern Warfare 2019 introduced the new matchmaking system that we have currently, and that is very, very different than the matchmaking they had prior to that game. So another technically true but not really the whole story again. We use player performance to ensure that the disparity between the most skilled player in the lobby and the least skilled player in the lobby isn't so vast that players feel their match is a waste of time. Our data on player outcomes clearly indicates that the inclusion of skill in Call of Duty's multiplayer matchmaking process, as it currently stands, increases the variety of outcomes experienced by players of all skill levels. In other words, all players, regardless of skill level, are more likely to experience wins and losses more proportionally. So yeah, that 50-50 win rate, 1 KD, regardless of skill. So that doesn't make any sense at all. It is a waste of time if you're a good player and you're still winning and losing at the same rate as below average players. If your performance isn't actually affecting the outcome, then the game is a waste of time. So if it's giving bad players easier games and giving good players harder games so that they both win about the same rate, then it is a waste of time for better players. Performance isn't considered. The game just determines who wins and who loses. So your performance doesn't actually matter. That's wasting the player's time. Our data shows that when lower skill players are consistently on the losing end, they are likely to quit matches in progress or stop playing altogether. This has an effect on the player pool. A smaller player pool means that wait times for matches increase and connections may not be as strong as they should be. This can compound over time to create a spiral effect. Eventually, when only high-skilled players remain because lower-skilled players have quit out of frustration, the result is an ecosystem that is worse overall for everyone. So yeah, that's just major cope. Nothing but cope there because, yeah, if they're losing all the time, they're not going to want to play. But the lower-skilled players, even before they introduced the new matchmaking, had their own skill bracket. So they were protected against the best players, the above-average players. They all played against each other, so that was never an issue. So the new matchmaking system doesn't solve anything. It doesn't change anything. That's how it was before. But nobody wants to lose all the time. But at the same time, giving them free wins or taking away wins from better players to give free wins to somebody else isn't the way things should be. You can have a mixed lobby. Mixed skill lobby with good players, bad players, average players, as long as team balancing splits it up a little bit, so it splits up the best players, splits up the worst players, and splits up the average players. It should be a fairly even match. It doesn't have to be 50-50 win rate, but it shouldn't be a blowout if they split up all the best players and split up all the worst players. It's pretty simple. You don't really need skill matching if you have a decent team balancing system that does like a schoolyard pick. Because if you have different skill levels on each team, it shouldn't be a blowout. Game data indicates that having some limitations on the disparity of skill across the players in a match makes for a healthier ecosystem. We also understand that many high skill players want more variety of experience, but often feel like they only get the sweatiest of lobbies. We have heard this feedback clearly and will continue to test and actively explore ways to mitigate this concern. So I always say game data backs up what they choose to implement, but they don't share the data. They don't say what the data is because the people who are looking at this data are the people who work on the matchmaking. So of course they're going to say the game data favors what they're doing with matchmaking because their job depends on it. If the data show that the matchmaking wasn't having a positive effect on their game, there'd be no need for their job. If all they do is work on matchmaking and the matchmaking isn't having a positive effect, they're out of a job. So that has to be taken with a grain of salt, I think, because they don't share the data, and data is up for interpretation. So the people interpreting it are the people who are working on the matchmaking and are the people whose jobs depend on it. So Got to take that with a grain of salt. Future communications. In addition to today's blog, our technology team is developing a ping and matchmaking white paper for those inclined to get into the more granular information about Call of Duty matchmaking. Stay tuned for more on this publication. To conclude, we wanted to answer some of the most frequently asked questions from the community. Community questions. Does Call of Duty consider player engagement, time played, as a factor in matchmaking? We do not consider how often or how much you play when determining matchmaking. So engagement optimized matchmaking, they're saying is not a thing. Possible, but who knows? Does the Call of Duty matchmaking process impact any in-game elements such as hit registration, player visibility, aim assist, damage, etc.? No. Our matchmaking process does not impact gameplay elements. So this has been a contentious thing where people think certain players do less damage, or aim assist is being affected by your skill rating and all that kind of stuff. So they're saying no, but they're also saying their matchmaking process does not impact these gameplay elements. So it wouldn't be the matchmaking process that would affect that. It'll just be your in-game matchup based on skill rating. So if it is affecting aim assist based on skill rating, that has nothing to do with the matchmaking. The matchmaking is just putting players together to find a match, but what happens in the match has nothing to do with the matchmaking process. So their wording doesn't necessarily confirm or deny whether that's in the game or not. So I personally believe it is in the game because there have been games where I couldn't kill players at all and they could kill me pretty easily, but they were usually the worst players in the lobby and I was the top of the leaderboard. So the only players I couldn't seem to kill were the worst players in the lobby, and the only player they could seem to kill was me. They couldn't kill anybody else on my team, but they could kill me. So I personally believe it is in the game because that's been noticeable all the way back to like Black Ops 3 time. But again, the way they said it here, they say it's not in the game, but at the same time they also said the matchmaking process doesn't impact it. So technically that may be true, but again, may not be the whole picture there, because the matchmaking process wouldn't be the implementation or not. So if it happens in the game, would be based on skill rating. So if a good player with a high skill rating is in a fight against a bad player with a low skill rating, it may give that low skill rating player favor in some of those areas. So they were very, very specific in saying the matchmaking process does not impact gameplay elements. They didn't say none of those things exist in the game. They said the matchmaking process does not impact those elements. So I would say that's legalese to try to protect themselves. I do believe it is in the game, but them saying the matchmaking process doesn't impact those things, while technically true, gives them some deniability, but at the same time doesn't actually deny if it's in the game or not. Does spending money on Call of Duty content such as bundles, battle pass, or black cell change how players are matched? Money spent does not in any way, shape, or form factor into matchmaking. So yeah, players thought that buying bundles and stuff would put you in matches with players who don't buy the bundles to get them to buy the bundles. So usually people would say once they bought like the battle pass or a bundle or something, they got a lot easier matches, but apparently that's not a factor. According to what they're saying anyway. Does Call of Duty use bots in multiplayer matchmaking? Call of Duty multiplayer does not use bots as part of the general matchmaking process. If this changes in the future, we will inform the community. So yeah, another thing people were saying was that the game was filling matches with bots and game modes that aren't supposed to have bots. So some game modes do have bots like Invasion, but the general game modes, they're saying they don't use bots. Do partners or content creators get special consideration in general matchmaking? No, we do not change the matchmaking process based on who owns the account. In specific cases, such as for events like Call of Duty Next, we may be required to customize how lobbies are formed. However, these events usually take place in private matches and do not impact general matchmaking. So they say they don't change the matchmaking process, but that doesn't mean they don't change some of the elements that affect the matchmaking. So people think that streamers and content creators and like Call of Duty partners are like whitelisted and some players are blacklisted to get easier or harder lobbies. So they didn't necessarily deny that. They just said that they don't change the matchmaking process. That doesn't mean they don't change the elements of matchmaking though for those players. So if they are giving them lower skill ratings or whatever than it should be to get easier lobbies, that's not changing the matchmaking process. It's just changing their skill rating. So whitelisting, but no idea if that's a thing or not. Have you ever considered an opt-in, opt-out system for the matchmaking algorithm? Our data suggests that splitting the player base with an opt-in, opt-out matchmaking system will have negative consequences on the overall player pool. That means potentially longer wait times based on the type of matchmaking selected, plus added into that playlist, map and mode history, platform and more, and matches with poor connections. Well, yeah, anything that splits the community is going to have negative effects on those types of things, but it's a simple implementation, giving players a choice. That's one of the main complaints is players don't have a choice. It's forced on everybody and it's hidden in the background so nobody can see. If it wasn't hidden, it wouldn't be that big of an issue. If it showed you what your skill rating was and what the skill rating of the enemies were and what the skill rating of your team was, you have an idea of how the matchmaking is trying to set it up. So if you know you're going to have a hard match because it put a bunch of low skill players on your team versus higher skill players on the other team, you know what to expect. So obviously that could lead to people quitting out of the match if they see that the odds are stacked against them, but the odds are stacked against them anyway, so it's just hidden in the background. So that's the main issue. Because if it's good for the game, it shouldn't be hidden. Like, you wouldn't have to hide it if it's good for the game. If you have to hide it, it's not good for the game and it shouldn't be in the game. Have you ever tested removing skill as a consideration from matchmaking? We have run tests over the years to determine if removing skill as a consideration for matchmaking makes sense. We will continue to launch these tests periodically. To date, the data remains consistent with what we detailed above. Players tend to quit matches or stop playing if they're getting blown out, resulting in a negative overall experience for all players in the lobby and the general player population. We purposefully do not disclose when these tests occur because it may impact feedback or the data we see during these tests. So again, removing skill entirely is probably not a good idea. You got to have that protected bracket for lower skill players. But at the same time, if team balancing works the way it should, where it splits up the best players in the match, splits up the worst players, there's not going to be blowouts. It's going to be semi-evenly matched. It may not be 50-50 win rate, but there's not going to be blowouts. So you don't need strict skill matching to prevent blowouts. You just need a decent team balancing system that splits up the highest skill and the lowest skill on opposite teams. Have you considered removing skill from matchmaking in specific general multiplayer game modes? We have considered this in the past, and we will continue to examine if this idea makes sense as part of an experimental playlist or in specific modes. We have nothing to announce on that front today. So yeah. It would be nice if they gave the option, any mode that doesn't have skill matching, but what would probably happen is the players who hate skill matching, so the better players, would all go for that mode that doesn't have skill matching, so they'd still be playing against each other, whereas the general population would just play whatever game modes they're playing, you know. So the skill matching really only negatively affects the above average players. It benefits the below average players. It doesn't really have an impact on the average players because they represent the vast majority. So the majority of games they play will consist of majority of average players, no matter what, whether they're skill matching or not. So it doesn't really affect their experience. It just means they'll never play against better players, but they'll also never play against significantly worse players either. So yeah, thank you for your feedback and for being part of our community. We'll see you in the lobby. So yeah, basically what you would expect. Nothing new. everything we all knew these things going into it, so they didn't share anything new, revelations or anything like that. Nothing in detail, nothing we actually wanted to know about the data or changes they're going to make or anything like that. So it doesn't sound like they're going to be changing anything. I didn't expect them to. They might be tweaking certain values here and there a little bit, but I don't expect any drastic changes. So pretty much a nothing burger. Just them saying that they opened up about it when they didn't really give us anything new. But yeah. So again, the data, you know, that's what they always say. It goes back to the data, but they don't share the data. So this type of skill matching was introduced back in Modern Warfare 2019, but that game had huge success, but for a lot of different reasons. Was it because of the skill matching? Maybe, but it could have been a lot of other factors as well, because it was, one, a return to a modern Call of Duty, so people were tired of all the futuristic, not realistic type stuff. So it's a modern military realistic shooter. It had a new engine, so brand new graphics, so the best graphics in the series. They added all kinds of new game modes like ground war and that kind of stuff to attract different players. So like the Battlefield crowd, who like bigger maps with vehicles and that kind of stuff. Then there was also Warzone, which blew up, and then it was also during the pandemic. So people were playing a lot more games because they're stuck inside, couldn't go out. So I mean, Modern Warfare 2019's success is due to a lot of factors. Was it due to the skill matching? Maybe it helped a little bit, but was that the main or the only factor? Definitely not. Because other games, new games like Black Ops Cold War and Vanguard also had the same skill matching system, but they weren't very popular at all. So
This motor fucking around anyway. Yeah, I love these snipers.
yeah, let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.